She shielded the alien boy from bullets, then woke to find his scales growing on her. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. The gunfire echoed through the narrow alley behind 3rd Street Market as Dr. Sarah Morgan pressed herself against the cold brick wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She was supposed to be home 2 hours ago, supposed to be safe in her apartment, grading undergraduate biology papers, not caught in the crossfire of what the news was already calling the Chicago incident. 3 weeks had passed since the Valorant refugee ships landed in Lake Michigan, and tensions had reached a breaking point. Sarah had never been the heroic type. She was 32 years old, average height, with brown hair that she always wore in a practical ponytail, and glasses that constantly slid down her nose when she was nervous. She taught biology at Northwestern University and spent her weekends reading scientific journals and hiking along the lakefront. Ordinary, unremarkable, safe, but there was nothing safe about the small Valorant child huddled behind the dumpster 10 ft away from her, his silvery blue scales catching the streetlight like scattered diamonds. He could not have been more than 7 or 8 years old in human terms, his large amber eyes wide with terror as bullets ricocheted off the metal around him. The anti-alien extremists were not aiming carefully, they were simply shooting at anything that moved, anything that did not look human. Sarah knew she should run. Every survival instinct screamed at her to flee while she had the chance. The shooters had not seen her yet, focused as they were on the Valorant family trying to escape down the main street, but the child was alone, separated from his parents in the chaos, and he was going to die if someone did not do something. Her hands were shaking as she made her decision. She had always been more comfortable with microscopes and petri dishes than real-world danger, but some things transcended comfort zones. Sarah sprinted across the alley in 3 quick strides, her sneakers slapping against the wet pavement. The child flinched as she dropped to her knees beside him, throwing her body over his smaller frame. As another volley of gunfire erupted, she felt something hot graze her shoulder, and then a sharp, burning pain lanced through her left arm. The child made a high-pitched keening sound beneath her, and she pressed him closer, curling around him like a human shield. Then she felt it, a tingling sensation spread from every point where her skin touched his scales, like tiny electric currents dancing across her nerve endings. It was not painful exactly, but profoundly strange, as if her cells were suddenly having a conversation with his in a language neither of them understood. The shooting stopped as abruptly as it had started. Sarah heard sirens in the distance, the squeal of tires shouted orders. Police had arrived. The extremists were fleeing. She remained motionless for several long seconds, her heart hammering against her ribs before slowly lifting her head. The Valorant child stared up at her with those enormous amber eyes now filled with something that looked like wonder. His small 3-fingered hand reached up and touched her cheek, and the tingling intensified for a moment before fading away. A Valorant adult rushed into the alley, calling out in the musical, chiming language of their species. The child scrambled from beneath Sarah and ran to what was presumably his mother, chattering rapidly and pointing back at the human woman who had protected him. The Valorant mother approached Sarah slowly, her own scales shimmering with patterns that Sarah had learned indicated gratitude. The alien woman pressed her hands together and bowed, deeply, speaking in accented but clear English. You saved my son. We are forever in your debt. Sarah shook her head, wincing as pain flared in her wounded arm. I just did what anyone would do. No, the Valoran woman said softly. Most would not. Most did not. Paramedics arrived before Sarah could respond, and the next few hours passed in a blur of emergency rooms, police interviews, and news cameras that she tried desperately to avoid. The bullet had only grazed her, requiring nothing more than cleaning and bandaging, but the doctors insisted on keeping her for observation. She finally made it home just before dawn, exhausted and aching, wanting nothing more than to sleep for about 16 hours straight. She did not notice the small patch of silvery scales on her left shoulder until she showered. The next morning, Sarah stood frozen in front of the bathroom mirror, water still dripping from her hair, staring at her reflection in disbelief. A cluster of perhaps 20 scales, each no larger than a sunflower seed, had appeared on her shoulder in a roughly circular pattern. They were the exact same silvery blue color as the Valoran child scales, and when she touched them they felt smooth and slightly warm, definitely part of her skin rather than something stuck to it. Her first instinct as a scientist was to document everything. She grabbed her phone and took several photos from different angles, then examined the scales more closely with a magnifying glass from her desk drawer. They were definitely real, definitely growing from her skin, and definitely not human. Her second instinct was to panic. Sarah called in sick to the university, something she had not done in 3 years, and spent the morning frantically researching everything she could find about Valoran biology. The internet was filled with speculation and conspiracy theories, but actual scientific data was sparse. The Valorans had only been on Earth for 3 weeks after all, fleeing some catastrophe in their home system that they had not fully explained to humanity. Yet what she did find was fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. The Valorans were a species that apparently formed deep biological bonds with those they considered family or close allies. Some articles mentioned something called a soul bond, though most scientists dismissed this as mystical nonsense. But there were documented cases of Valorans sharing physiological traits with their bonded partners, cases where married Valorans began to mirror each other's scale patterns or eye colors over time. Had the child somehow bonded with her? Was that even possible between species? By midday, the patch of scales had grown, not dramatically but noticeably. Sarah counted 37 scales now, spreading slowly across her shoulder like frost patterns on a window. She touched them again, marveling at how natural they felt, how right despite being completely alien. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost did not answer, but something made her pick up. Dr. Morgan. This is Counselor Renith from the Valoran Integration Center. I'm calling on behalf of Kalen and his mother, Lissa. They would very much like to speak with you if you are willing. Sarah's throat went dry. Kalen, the child had a name. I don't understand what's happening to me, she said quietly. I have scales growing on my shoulder. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Yes, Renith said finally. We were afraid of this. Would you be willing to come to the center? We can explain everything, and Kalen has been asking for you. Constantly since yesterday, he believes. He hurt you, he didn't hurt me, I was shocked, not that kind of hurt. Renith replied, please, Dr. Morgan. Come to the center. Let us explain what has happened between you and the child. Sarah agreed, more out of desperate need for answers than anything else, and found herself driving to the Valoran Integration Center in downtown Chicago 2 hours later. The facility was heavily guarded, surrounded by both police and private security after the shooting. Protesters lined the sidewalks on both sides, some supporting the Valoran refugees, others demanding their immediate deportation. Sarah kept her head down and hurried inside. Interior of the center was surprisingly beautiful, designed with flowing curves and soft lighting that felt organic rather than institutional. Renith met her in the lobby, a tall Valoran with deep purple scales and kind eyes who immediately put her at ease despite the strangeness of the situation. Thank you for coming, Renith said, guiding her toward a private meeting room. What I am about to tell you may be difficult to accept, but please understand that everything Kalen did, he did unconsciously. He is very young and his abilities are not yet under his control. What abilities? Renith gestured for Sarah to sit, then settled into a chair designed for Valoran physiology. Our species has evolved a unique survival mechanism. When a Valoran experiences a life-threatening situation and is saved by another being, sometimes a bond forms. We call it the resonance. It is a deep biological connection that links the two individuals on a cellular level. Sarah felt her stomach drop. That's what's happening. I'm bonding with a child I don't even know. The resonance is not romantic or familial in the human sense, Renith explained gently. It is more like a recognition of debt, of connection, of lives intertwined. Kalen was certain he was going to die. You saved him at great personal risk. His body recognized that sacrifice and reached out to yours, seeking to repay it in the only way our biology knows. How? By turning me into a Valoran. Not exactly. Renith folded her long fingers together. The resonance shares traits, but it does not transform. You will remain human in all the ways that matter. But some of Kalen's characteristics may manifest in you, and some of your characteristics may manifest in him. It is a two-way exchange. Sarah touched her shoulder, where the scales were hidden under her shirt. How far will this go? We don't know, Renith admitted. This has never happened between a human and a Valoran before. Our two species have only just met. You are the first documented case of interspecies resonance in our history. The door to the meeting room opened and Lissa entered holding Kalen's hand. The child looked small and frightened. His scales dulled from their usual shimmer when he saw Sarah. His eyes widened and he pulled free from his mother, running across the room and throwing his arms around her waist. Sarah gasped as that tingling sensation returned, stronger than before, spreading from every point where Kalen touched her. She could feel something flowing between them, something warm and bright and utterly alien, yet somehow comforting. I'm sorry, Kalen whispered in heavily accented English. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to change you. Sarah surprised herself by kneeling down and hugging him back. It's okay, she said. You didn't do anything wrong. I'm not angry, but you have scales now. Mother told me. I gave you scales and I didn't ask, and that's wrong. Sarah looked up at Lissa, who had tears streaming down her face. The Valoran woman pressed her hands together in that gesture of gratitude again. He has not stopped worrying, Lissa said. He thinks he has cursed you. Sarah turned her attention back to Kalen, gently tilting his chin up so he would meet her eyes. Listen to me, she said firmly. What you did might be strange and it might be scary, but it's not a curse. You were frightened and your body did what it needed to do to survive. I don't blame you for that, not at all. Do you promise? I promise. Kalen hugged her again, and this time Sarah noticed something odd. When she looked down at her hands, she saw tiny flecks of color in her fingernails, the same amber gold as Kalen's eyes. The resonance was accelerating. Over the next 2 weeks, the changes became impossible to hide. The scales spread from Sarah's shoulder down her arm and across her back in intricate, beautiful patterns. Her left eye developed a ring of amber around the pupil. Her fingernails took on a permanent golden sheen. Most strangely, she discovered she could sense Kalen's emotional state even from miles away. When he was happy, she felt a warm glow in her chest. When he was frightened or sad, a cold ache settled in her stomach. Renith explained that this was normal. For resonance bonds, the two individuals became emotionally attuned to each other, able to sense each other's well-being across significant distances. It was both fascinating and terrifying to Sarah, who had always valued her independence and privacy, but there were benefits too. Sarah discovered that her eyesight had improved dramatically, particularly in low light conditions. She could see colors she had never perceived before, subtle gradations in the ultraviolet spectrum that Valorans naturally observed. Her hearing had sharpened as well, and her reflexes were noticeably faster. Whatever was happening to her, it was not simply cosmetic. The scientific community exploded with interest when word leaked about her condition. Sarah found herself besieged by researchers from around the world, all wanting to study the first documented case of human Valoran bonding. She agreed to participate in several studies, partly out of scientific curiosity and partly because she hoped someone might find a way to reverse the process. But as the weeks turned into months, Sarah found herself less interested in reversal and more interested in understanding. The bond with Kalen had opened up entire new avenues of research into cross-species biology and consciousness. She co-authored 3 papers on the subject and became something of a reluctant celebrity in xenobiology circles. More importantly, she got to know Kalen and his mother. What started as a traumatic incident slowly transformed into genuine friendship. Sarah found herself visiting the integration center several times, weeks spending time with the young Valoran, teaching him about Earth while he taught her about his lost home world. Kalen was wickedly smart with a natural aptitude for mathematics and pattern recognition that astounded Sarah. He was also sweet and funny, with a mischievous streak that frequently got him into trouble at the refugee school. Sarah discovered that she genuinely enjoyed his company, looked forward to their visits, missed him when they were apart. The emotional bond worked both ways. Sarah learned from Lissa that Kalen had started exhibiting some human traits as well. His body temperature had increased, slightly moving closer to human normal. His sleep cycle had shifted to match human circadian rhythms rather than the longer Valoran day-night pattern most Strikingly, he had developed a craving for human foods, particularly chocolate and strawberries, neither of which were supposed to be compatible with Valoran digestion. You are changing each other, Renith observed during one of their regular checkups, not just physically, but in your very essence. This is what the resonance does. It creates a bridge between two beings, allowing them to share not just traits but experiences, perspectives, ways of being. Is it permanent? Sarah asked. We believe so. Yes, the resonance once formed does not break, but it does stabilize. The changes you are both experiencing should slow down and eventually stop once equilibrium is reached. And when will that be? Renith's expression was unreadable. We do not know. Every resonance bond is different. 6 months after the shooting, Sarah stood in front of her bathroom mirror and barely recognized the person staring back at her. Silvery blue scales now covered roughly 30% of her body, creating intricate patterns across her shoulders, down her arms and along her ribs. Both of her eyes had amber rings around the pupils. Her hair had developed subtle, iridescent highlights that caught the light like oil on water. She was still undeniably human, but she was also something more, something other. The university had been remarkably supportive throughout her transformation. Her department chair had issued a statement condemning any discrimination against her, and several colleagues had spoken out publicly in her defense. But Sarah still noticed the stares in the hallways, the whispered conversations that stopped when she walked by, the students who dropped her classes without explanation. She was also becoming famous in ways she had never wanted. News outlets around the world had picked up her story. She shielded the alien boy from bullets, then woke to find his scales growing on her. The headline screamed, Sarah Morgan, the first human-alien hybrid, the woman who bonded with an alien child. She hated the sensationalism, the way they reduced something profound and complex to clickbait headlines. But there were positive aspects too. She received thousands of messages from people around the world, many of them expressing support for the Valoran refugees and admiration for her sacrifice. Several organizations had reached out asking her to speak about interspecies cooperation and understanding. She had reluctantly agreed to few engagements, using her platform to advocate for better treatment of the Valorans. It was at one of these speaking events that everything changed again. Sarah was giving a lecture at the University of Chicago on the biological mechanics of the resonance bond when armed men burst into the auditorium. There were 5 of them, wearing masks and carrying military-grade weapons. The audience erupted into screams and chaos as people scrambled for the exits. Everyone stay where you are, the lead gunman shouted. We're looking for Sarah Morgan and any Valoran sympathizers. This ends today. Sarah's blood ran cold. She recognized the insignia on the men's jackets. They were part of Humanity First, the extremist group responsible for the original shooting that had started everything. They had come to finish what they started. Security alarms were already blaring, and Sarah knew police would be there soon, but these men did not look like they planned to wait around. The lead gunman pointed his weapon directly at her. You should have let that creature die, he snarled. Instead, you betrayed your own species. You're an abomination. Sarah felt Kalen's terror spike through their bond. He was somewhere in the building, Lissa had brought him to watch Sarah's lecture, and now he was in danger again. The gunman's finger tightened on the trigger, and Sarah had a fraction of a second to realize she was about to die. But then something extraordinary happened. The scales on her arms suddenly flared with light, bright, silvery blue luminescence that filled the entire auditorium. She felt a surge of energy unlike anything she had experienced before, power flowing through the resonance bond from Kaylin to her, amplified by her own biology. She moved without thinking, faster than should have been possible, diving behind the podium as bullets chewed up the wood where she had been standing. But she was not trying to hide, she was trying to get to Kaylin. Sarah spotted him huddled with his mother near the back exit, trapped by two of the gunmen who had cut off that escape route. The protective fury that surged through her was primal and overwhelming. She had saved this child once before. She would not let him die now. "Get away from them," she shouted, and was shocked by the harmonic resonance in her voice, the way it seemed to carry multiple tones at once. Human and Valoran blended together. The gunmen turned toward her, and that was their mistake. Sarah was no longer just human. She had been training her new abilities in secret with Renith and other Valorans, learning what her hybrid physiology could do. The Valorans were not a violent species, but they had evolved several defensive capabilities that Sarah was only beginning to understand. She focused her will through the scales on her arms, and they responded by emitting a pulse of light so bright it was blinding. The gunman cried out and stumbled backward, firing wildly. But Sarah was already moving, her enhanced reflexes allowing her to weave between the bullets like they were moving in slow motion. From her perspective, she reached the two men threatening Kaylin and Alyssa, and did not hesitate. Sarah had never been in a fight in her life, but the resonance bond fed her instincts and knowledge from Kaylin's genetic memory, defensive techniques that Valorans had used for thousands of years. She struck with precise, devastating efficiency, targeting nerve clusters and pressure points that dropped both men before they could react. The other three gunmen were recovering from the light pulse, raising their weapons again, but police were pouring into the auditorium now. The situation devolved into a tense standoff, with the extremists backing toward a side exit while keeping their guns trained on the crowd. Sarah positioned herself between the gunmen and Kaylin, scales still glowing with that otherworldly light. If they wanted to hurt him, they would have to go through her first. The standoff ended when a SWAT team breached from multiple entrances simultaneously. The gunmen were tackled and subdued within seconds, dragged away screaming threats and obscenities. Sarah's scales slowly dimmed as the adrenaline faded, leaving her shaking and exhausted. Kaylin ran to her, and she caught him, holding him close as both of them trembled. Through their bond, she felt his fear transforming into relief, felt his absolute trust in her, his certainty that she would always protect him, and she felt her own fierce love for this strange, wonderful child who had changed her life in ways she never could have imagined. The aftermath was intense. Sarah spent hours giving statements to police and federal investigators. The Humanity First cell was dismantled, its members arrested and charged with multiple counts of attempted murder and terrorism. The incident sparked a national conversation about anti-Valoran extremism, and led to new protections for the refugees, but for Sarah the most important outcome was personal. Standing in that auditorium, defending Kaylin, with abilities she barely understood. She had finally accepted what she had become. She was no longer just human and no longer trying to be. She was something new, a bridge between two species, and she was proud of it. The changes continued for another 3 months. Before finally stabilizing, Sarah ended up with scales covering approximately 40% of her body in beautiful, symmetrical patterns. Her eyes had both converted fully to amber, giving her vision capabilities that far exceeded normal human range. She discovered she could control the luminescence of her scales, using them for communication or defense as needed. Her strength and reflexes had increased dramatically, and she had developed a limited form of empathy that extended beyond just Kaylin to other Valorans she spent time with. Kaylin's changes were equally dramatic. He had grown taller than typical for his age group, his body taking on a more human-like proportion. His body temperature had fully equalized to human normal, and he had developed the ability to process a much wider range of foods. Most remarkably, he had started exhibiting emotional expressions that were distinctly human, facial configurations that other Valorants found baffling, but that Sarah understood perfectly. They had truly become hybrid versions of themselves, each carrying permanent markers of their shared trauma and the bond it had forged. A year after the shooting, Sarah was invited to speak at the United Nations about human Valorant integration. She stood at the podium wearing a sleeveless dress that proudly displayed her scales. Kaylin and Alyssa sitting in the front row and addressed the assembled representatives from around the world. When I threw myself over Kaylin to protect him from bullets, she said, her voice steady and clear, I had no idea what would happen. I did not know about the resonance bond. I did not know I would be changed forever. I just knew that a child was in danger and I had to help. That is what humanity is supposed to be about, not fear of the different, not violence against the other, but protection of the vulnerable and compassion for those in need. She paused, letting her scales shimmer with soft light. What happened to me might seem frightening to some. I carry the marks of an alien species on my body and in my very cells, but I do not see these changes as a loss of my humanity. I see them as an expansion of what it means to be human. We are a species defined by our ability to adapt, to learn, to grow, to form connections across barriers that seem insurmountable. The Valorans came to Earth as refugees fleeing a catastrophe we still do not fully understand. They came seeking safety, seeking acceptance, seeking a chance to rebuild their lives. Some responded to their arrival with fear and hatred, but many more responded with kindness, with curiosity, with open hands instead of closed fists. I am living proof that we are not so different from them. Our biology can merge, our experiences can be shared, our futures can be intertwined. The resonance bond that connects me to Kaylin has taught me that consciousness and compassion transcends species boundaries. We are all just beings trying to survive, trying to protect those we care about, trying to make sense of an enormous and often terrifying universe. She gestured to Kaylin, who stood up shyly. This child has changed my life in ways I could never have anticipated. He has given me gifts I did not ask for but have. Learned to treasure, enhance senses, increase strength, the ability to perceive the world in ways humans have never experienced before, but more than that, he has given me a new family, a new purpose, a new understanding of what is possible when we choose connection over division. The audience was silent. Hanging on every word, Sarah took a deep breath and delivered her closing statement. I stand before you today as a human and as something more than human. I stand as a bridge between two species, a living symbol of what we can become if we choose understanding over fear. The resonance bond cannot be artificially created, but the principles behind it can be embraced by anyone. Recognize the value in all beings. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. Be willing to be changed by your encounters with the other. We are at a crossroads as a species. We can choose to welcome the Valorans as partners in building a new future, or we can choose fear and isolation. I know which path I am on. I hope you will join me. The applause was thunderous and sustained. Sarah saw tears on many faces in the audience, both human and Valoran. She stepped down from the podium, and Kalen ran to her, throwing his arms around her waist in the gesture that had become their signature. Through their bond, she felt his pride, his love, his certainty that everything had happened exactly as it was supposed to. The speech went viral within hours, viewed by hundreds of millions of people around the world. It became a turning point in human-Valoran relations, shifting public opinion dramatically in favor of integration rather than segregation. Sarah became the unofficial ambassador between the two species, working with governments and organizations to facilitate better understanding and cooperation. But her most important role remained as Kalen's bonded guardian. As he grew older, the resonance bond deepened in new ways. They discovered they could share thoughts and memories more vividly, could sense each other across even greater distances, could coordinate their actions with uncanny precision when working together. 3 years after the shooting, Sarah and Alyssa co-founded the Resonance Institute, a research facility dedicated to studying cross-species bonding and developing frameworks for peaceful integration of different civilizations. Kalen, now the equivalent of a human 11-year-old, was their youngest research assistant and most valuable subject, providing insights into the bonding process that no one else could offer. The Institute attracted scientists from around the world and from other alien species that had begun making contact with Earth following the Valorans' arrival. It turned out that humanity's ability to form the resonance bond was not unique to interactions with Valorans, but was a rare trait that made humans valuable as diplomatic intermediaries between species that could bond with each other. Sarah found herself at the center of a revolution in xenobiology and interspecies relations, her own body serving as proof of concept for theories that would have seemed like science fiction just a few years earlier. She published dozens of papers, mentored graduate students, and consulted with governments on first contact protocols. But the moments she treasured most were the quiet ones, sitting with Kalen in the Institute's garden, talking about everything and nothing. He had fully adapted to life on Earth, excelling in school and making friends both human and Valoran, but he never forgot what had brought them together never took for granted the sacrifice Sarah had made. Do you ever regret it? He asked one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in colors only they could fully perceive. Saving me, I mean, becoming what you are now. Sarah looked down at her scaled arms, at the permanent marks of their connection, and smiled. Not even for a second, she said honestly. You changed my life, Kaylin. You made me more than I was. How could I regret that? I used to feel guilty about it, about changing you without permission. You were a frightened child. You did what you needed to survive. And honestly, she added thoughtfully, I think I needed changing. I was so focused on being safe, on following the rules, on not taking risks. I was barely living. You taught me what it means to truly be alive, to connect with others on a fundamental level, to be brave enough to become something new. Kaylin leaned against her shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead. Through their bond, Sarah felt his contentment, his sense of belonging, his absolute certainty that they were exactly where they were supposed to be. 5 years after the shooting, Sarah stood in the same alley where everything had begun, now marked with a memorial plaque commemorating the victims of the attack and celebrating the beginning of true human valor and integration. Kaylin stood beside her, now as tall as her shoulder, his scales shimmering with the distinctive patterns he had developed that marked him as bonded to a human. Crowd had gathered for the memorial dedication, including Lissa Renith, members of the Integration Center, university colleagues, and dozens of humans and Valoran who had formed their own bonds in the years since. Resonance phenomenon had spread with over 200 documented cases of human Valoran bonding, each unique and each contributing to the growing understanding between the species. Sarah looked at the faces in the crowd, at the mixture of scaled skin and smooth, at amber eyes and blue, at the visible evidence of two species learning to coexist and even merge. This was the future she had accidentally helped create, standing in this alley 5 years ago, making the split-second decision to protect a frightened child. She thought about that version of herself, the woman who had just been trying to get home safely, who had never taken a risk in her life, who could not have imagined the path she was about to walk. That Sarah had been afraid of being shot, and rightfully so, but she had been more afraid of living with the knowledge that she had stood by and done nothing. The current Sarah, marked by scales and transformed by an alien bond, understood that the real danger had never been the bullets. The real danger had been staying safe, staying unchanged, staying isolated from the infinite possibilities that come from connecting with others who are different from ourselves. When it was her turn to speak, Sarah kept it brief. 5 years ago in this alley, she said, I learned that humanity's greatest strength is not our technology or our intelligence or our adaptability, though we have all of those in abundance. Our greatest strength is our willingness to shield the vulnerable with our own bodies, to take on wounds so others might survive, to choose compassion in the face of fear. She placed her hand on Kaylin's shoulder, feeling the familiar tingle of their connection. I gained scales that day, yes, but I also gained a family, a purpose, a future I never could have imagined, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. The crowd erupted in applause, but Sarah barely heard it. She was focused on the warmth flowing through her bond with Kalen on the web of connections she could feel extending. From him to her, to all the other bonded pairs in the crowd, they were all part of something larger now, something that transcended species and biology, and even conscious choice. They were proof that life always found a way to connect, to adapt, to create something new and beautiful from tragedy and chaos. They were living evidence that the barriers between beings were never as solid as they seemed, that consciousness and compassion could bridge any gap. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Sarah caught sight of herself in a nearby shop window. The scales on her arms glinted in the fading light, beautiful and alien and completely natural. She smiled at her reflection, at the woman she had become, at the future she was still discovering. Kalen tugged on her hand. "Can we get ice cream?" he asked, his voice carrying that distinctive harmonic quality that marked his own hybrid nature. Sarah laughed. "Absolutely. What flavor are you craving?" "Chocolate and starfruit," he said immediately, naming a combination that only someone with both human and Valoran taste receptors could appreciate. They walked together down the street, a human woman covered in alien scales and a Valoran boy with two human expressions, and nobody gave them a second glance. This was the new normal, the world they had helped create, where being different was not threatening but simply another variation of being. Later that night, after Kalen had gone home with Lissa, Sarah stood on her apartment balcony looking out over the Chicago skyline. The Valoran ships were still visible in the distance, massive vessels that had become a permanent part of the landscape. Second wave of refugees had arrived last month, and integration efforts were expanding to accommodate them. Her phone buzzed with a message from Renith asking if she would be willing to consult on a new bonding case, a Valoran teenager who had accidentally bonded with a human firefighter during a rescue. Sarah smiled and typed back her agreement. This was her life now, helping others navigate the strange and wonderful path she had pioneered. She touched the scales on her arm, tracing the patterns that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. They were warm beneath her fingers, alive and responsive, a permanent reminder of the day she had chosen to be brave. Sarah had never planned to become the first human Valoran hybrid. She had never wanted fame or recognition or the responsibility that came with being a living symbol of interspecies cooperation. She had just wanted to save a child's life, but in saving him she had discovered something profound about humanity and about herself. People were not defined by their biology or their species or their appearance. They were defined by their choices, by their willingness to sacrifice for others, by their capacity for growth and change and connection. The woman who had stood in that alley 5 years ago had been ordinary, average, unremarkable, but she had made a remarkable choice, and it had transformed her into something extraordinary. Sarah looked down at her hands, scaled and golden-nailed, and more capable than they had ever been when they were merely human. She thought about Kalen, probably asleep by now, their bond humming quietly in the back of her consciousness like a second heartbeat. She thought about all the other bonded pairs forming connections that would have seemed impossible just few years ago. This was the legacy of that split-second decision in a dark alley, not just her personal transformation, but a fundamental shift in how humanity understood itself and its place in the universe. They were not separate from alien species, not fundamentally different, not incapable of merging and changing and becoming more than they had been. They were adaptable, they were compassionate, they were willing to shield the vulnerable, even at great personal cost, and those qualities Sarah had discovered were more powerful than any weapon, more valuable than any technology, more important than any border or boundary or biological difference. She was still Sarah Morgan, still a biology professor who liked quiet weekends and scientific journals, but she was also so much more than that now. She was a bridge between worlds, a guardian of the future, a living testament to the power of choosing connection over fear. And, standing on her balcony under alien stars, scales shimmering in the moonlight, Sarah had never felt more profoundly, completely human. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one, and I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug and see you in the next story.